Most people think collapse begins with violence. It usually begins with weight, not the dramatic kind, not tanks in the streets, not the cinematic fantasy where a man shoulders a giant pack, disappears into the tree line, and becomes some post-grid legend. Real collapse starts with mass on bone, extra pounds on damaged knees, waterlogged fabric dragging on your spine, sweat soaking your shirt because you packed for fear instead of function. And the first hard truth is this: the person carrying too much is not more prepared. He is already in decline. That is the lie almost every survival channel sells. They teach inventory. They teach accumulation. They turn preparedness into a shopping cart with shoulder straps, more pouches, more steel, more backup tools for the backup tools. It looks serious. It feels responsible. But under stress, mass becomes time, and time becomes exposure. Every additional pound taxes the body twice. Once in raw energy, and again in decision quality. Your legs go first, then your pace, then your judgment. And when judgment starts to go, people do stupid things with absolute confidence. That matters more than most people understand, because in a real breakdown, you are not hiking through a national park. You are moving through a human landscape under strain. Roads clog, gas stations empty, minor intersections become pressure points. Crowds form around rumors, water, medicine, and authority. The danger is not just the criminal with a weapon. It is the checkpoint, the bottleneck, the broken bridge, the panicked family in a sedan, the local strongman deciding who passes, the tired cop, the amateur militia, the desperate neighbor who notices you are carrying the one thing he failed to prepare. In that environment, your bag is no longer just a bag. It is a signal. It tells people you have supplies, a destination, and something to lose. And there is another layer most people miss. Your body is a heat engine. It burns fuel to move mass through terrain. That is not motivational language. That is physics. Add load, and your energy demand rises. Add bad weather, and the penalty multiplies. Add elevation, rubble, mud, or urban debris, and the cost spikes again. A heavy pack does not just slow you down. It increases water loss, increases overheating risk, increases recovery time, and narrows your margin for mistakes. That means the real failure point in collapse is not usually lack of gear. It is a mismatch between what you carry and what your body can sustain. History is full of this lesson. Retreating armies have abandoned artillery, then vehicles, then food, then weapons. Not because those things were useless, but because overloaded movement eventually collapses into immobility. Refugee columns in modern wars leave behind furniture first, then suitcases, then family heirlooms, until all that remains is what the body can still justify. Crisis strips theory down to metabolism. That is why the entire question has been asked backward. The question is not, what should I pack? The real question is, what capabilities must remain with me after fatigue, weather, fear, delay, and human interference have taken their share? That changes everything. Because the moment you think in capabilities instead of objects, half the survival industry dies in your hands. Comfort dies. Redundancy dies. Aesthetic gear dies. What survives is only what keeps generating options when the world starts subtracting them. And once you understand that, another uncomfortable truth appears. The people most likely to fail are not the unprepared. They are the half-prepared, the ones carrying enough gear to feel safe, but not enough doctrine to understand what gear is for. They are slower than the empty-handed, louder than the disciplined, and more visible than the invisible. They enter collapse with confidence and discover too late that confidence is heavy. So before we get to what actually deserves space on your back, you need to understand the rule that decides whether any item belongs there at all. Not the rule of comfort, not the rule of price, not even the rule of survival, the rule of continuation. Because if an item cannot keep you moving, hidden, warm, hydrated, or adaptable under pressure, then it is not helping you escape collapse. It is helping collapse catch you. The rule of continuation is simple. If a tool cannot solve multiple problems in sequence, it is dead weight disguised as preparedness. That is the difference between a survival kit and a collapse kit. A survival kit helps you endure an isolated emergency. A collapse kit helps you keep functioning while conditions keep changing. That distinction sounds small until you live inside it. A stranded hiker may only need to survive one cold night and wait for rescue. A person moving through systemic failure is dealing with a chain reaction: weather, delay, blocked routes, contaminated water, crowd friction, exhaustion, maybe injury, maybe no safe place to stop. In that world, nothing stays a one-variable problem for long. Fire is not just warmth. Water is not just thirst. Shelter is not just rain protection. Every need drags three more behind it. That is why the first thing that matters is not food, and it is not a weapon. It is thermal control. Most people get this wrong because movies train them to fear dramatic death, gunfire, starvation, marauders. In reality, one of the fastest ways to become non-functional is getting cold and wet at the wrong time. Not necessarily freezing to death in a snowstorm. Just losing enough heat, dexterity, and clarity that your next 5 decisions get worse. Wet skin conducts heat away from the body far faster than dry skin. Wind strips away the warm boundary layer your body is constantly trying to build. Add fatigue, low calories, and stress hormones, and now your hands stop doing fine work right when you need fine work most. You fumble knots. You struggle with lids. You stop thinking ahead. This is why people in bad conditions often die in a cascade rather than a single event. First, they get wet, then slow, then clumsy, then stupid, then still. So, the first real capability is not starting a fire in the abstract. It is being able to create heat under bad conditions, repeatedly, with degraded hands, low light, and imperfect tinder. The fantasy version of fire is one spark and a triumphant flame. The real version is a system: ignition, fuel processing, wind management, dry material, container logic, and time. If your fire method only works when you are calm, dry, and comfortable, then it does not work. It performs. The same is true for water. People obsess over purification gadgets because gadgets feel modern, and modern feels reliable. But collapse punishes systems that depend on delicate components. Filters clog, membranes fail, housings crack. Small plastic parts disappear in mud and darkness. Water itself is not just a consumption issue. It is transport, treatment, storage, and heat. A good solution lets you collect suspect water, make it safe with certainty, move it, and use it for other functions without introducing new fragility. That means the real question is not, can this item clean water? It is, can this item remain useful after impact, freezing, soot, fire, and repetition? Now the deeper layer. Thermal control and water are not separate systems. They merge immediately. A container that can purify water can also generate warmth. Heat water, and now you have a crude radiator for your core when night drops faster than expected. A fire system is not just about morale or cooking. It sterilizes, dries, signals, and extends the useful range of your body. This is what most gear-heavy thinking misses. In hard conditions, isolated tools are weak. Chained capabilities are strong. One item becomes valuable when it helps 2 others do their jobs. And this is where the first myth needs to die. The myth is that more redundancy always makes you safer. It does not. Sometimes redundancy is wisdom. Often it is just fear taking up volume. 3 cheap solutions to the same problem are often worse than one robust solution to a larger class of problems. In infrastructure terms, fragile systems fail because they are complex in the wrong places. In survival terms, people fail because they packed too many answers to yesterday's imagined scenario and not enough adaptable capacity for tomorrow's real one. So now the standard becomes brutal. Every item has to answer a hard question. After the first 24 hours of confusion, movement, moisture, and improvisation, are you still producing options, or are you just occupying space? Because that is what the pack is really for. Not comfort, not identity, not performance theater. It is a mobile reserve of options, and every bad item steals option space from a better one. But even people who understand fire and water still miss the next trap. They assume the goal is to move until they are tired, then stop wherever they can. That works in wilderness fiction. It fails in human terrain, because the next thing that decides whether you stay alive is not what you carry in your hand. It is whether you can disappear on purpose. Most people think shelter is about comfort. In a collapse, shelter is about signature. That is the hidden layer. Not whether you can sleep well, whether you can exist without being noticed. Because once systems fail, visibility becomes its own kind of gravity. It pulls attention, questions, envy, authority, pity, and predation, and all of those cost energy. The wrong shelter is not just poor protection from weather. It is a declaration. It tells the world where you are, what you have, how long you plan to stay, and how badly you need that spot. This is why the average civilian idea of shelter is backward. They imagine a tent, a cleared site, maybe a neat little camp with order and routine. But in real instability, fixedness is risk. Structured shelters can trap you psychologically before they trap you physically. The more time you spend building comfort, the more you begin defending place instead of preserving mobility. And that is how people get anchored to bad ground. Bad ground can mean many things. A floodplain that looks safe until upstream rain turns it into a channel. A roadside tree line close enough to hear traffic and close enough to be found. An abandoned structure that feels secure but becomes a magnet for others after dark. A valley that concentrates cold air. A hilltop that silhouettes movement. Geography is never passive. It is always making offers with hidden prices. The right shelter logic is different. Low profile. Fast up, fast down. Minimal signature. Weather control without territorial commitment. You want something that can break wind, shed rain, hide shape, and change role the moment conditions shift. Because weather does not arrive alone. Rain becomes mud. Mud becomes slow movement. Slow movement increases exposure. Exposure increases the chance of contact. This is how infrastructure failure and meteorology merge into survival pressure, not as separate topics but as a chain. And once again, the human factor matters more than people admit. Crowds do not move toward truth. They move toward signals. Light, smoke, noise, routine trails, repeated paths to water, obvious camps, visible gear colors, even the simple pattern of someone returning to the same place. Human beings are pattern hunters under stress. They scan for advantage, authority, weakness, and shelter. That means your shelter is not just protecting you from the environment. It is either disrupting pattern recognition or feeding it. History gives this lesson over and over. In sieges, migrations, and wartime displacements, the people who lasted were not always the strongest. Often they were the least legible. They did not look rich. They did not move like targets. They did not advertise permanence. They reduced friction by reducing notice. Survival in unstable systems often belongs to the person who creates the smallest social wake. That leads to the next myth that needs to die. The myth is that the best tool is the strongest specialized one. It sounds right. It sounds masculine. It sounds serious. But specialized tools make sense in stable systems, where resupply, maintenance, and predictable tasks exist. Collapse is the opposite. Collapse rewards versatile tools, because versatile tools let you shape the environment instead of waiting for the correct environment to appear. The perfect example is cutting and binding. You do not need 5 separate implements for 5 ideal tasks. You need one reliable edge and one reliable means of fastening, so you can alter wood, fabric, packaging, shelter, clothing, and salvage on demand. A blade is not just a blade. It is leverage, processing, access, repair, and force. Cordage is not just rope. It is structure, transport, trapping, suspension, splinting, reinforcement, and control. Together, they let you turn found material into systems. That is the real threshold. The moment your tools let you convert environment into utility, you stop being just a carrier of supplies and start becoming a builder of options. And that matters because supplies run downward. Everything depletes. Food gets eaten. Batteries die. Filters age. Even good gear tears, loosens, punctures, and fails at the seams. Which means the long game is never about how much equipment you bought. It is about whether your tools let you repair, adapt, and continue when the original form breaks. That is the line between preparation and dependence. One lives off stored decisions. The other keeps making new ones. And once you see that, the final illusion falls apart. Because the biggest weakness in most kits is not what they forgot to include. It is that they were designed as if the gear would remain intact. It won't. And when things begin to tear, leak, separate, and rot, survival stops being a question of ownership. It becomes a question of maintenance doctrine. Maintenance doctrine is what separates a person carrying equipment from a person carrying continuity. Because collapse is not a single impact. It is abrasion. It is the slow violence of friction, moisture, fatigue, and repetition. Fabric rubs through, seams open, soles peel, containers crack, closures fail, metal corrodes, adhesives soften in heat and stiffen in cold. The fantasy version of survival is one dramatic test. The real version is 1,000 small failures arriving early, quietly, and often at the worst possible time. A kit that cannot absorb damage is not a survival system. It is a countdown. This is why repair matters more than people think, and why waterproofing matters more than people admit. Not because those topics are glamorous, but because they govern whether all your other capabilities remain alive. Dry tinder is not just convenience, it is future heat. Dry socks are not comfort. They are mobility. A patched shelter is not thrift. It is another night of thermal control without having to burn extra calories or expose yourself finding a new site. In a broken world, small repairs are not small. They are extensions of life. This is where people who prepare emotionally begin to lose to people who prepare structurally. Emotional preparation buys dramatic items. Structural preparation protects functions. It asks colder questions. What keeps insulation dry? What restores load-bearing material after a tear? What keeps a water system usable after impact? What keeps movement possible after clothing or footwear begins to fail? That way of thinking sounds less exciting because it lacks fantasy. But fantasy never carried anyone through day 6. Process did. And now we get to the final myth. The myth is that survival belongs to the toughest person. No, not for long. In the opening shock, toughness helps. In the middle, systems thinking wins. The survivor is usually not the strongest, the most aggressive, or the most heavily loaded. It is the person who understands conversion, how to convert one resource into 3 functions, how to convert shelter into concealment, heat into water safety, cordage into structure, containers into temperature control, damaged gear into usable gear again. Above all, how to convert panic into sequence. That last one is everything, because panic is just unsequenced thought under pressure. It is the brain seeing 10 problems and attacking all of them badly. Doctrine solves that. Doctrine gives order when emotion starts scattering your attention. First, preserve body temperature, then secure water logic, then reduce signature, then repair what protects those 3. Only after that do secondary concerns deserve energy. This is why the brain matters more than the bag. The bag is only valuable if it supports a correct order of operations. So what actually belongs in a collapse kit? Not a random pile of impressive objects. What belongs are the few tools that preserve the pillars of continuation: heat, water, shelter, cutting power, binding power, dryness, and repair. Not because 7 is a magic number, but because these are the categories that keep generating options after the environment starts removing them. Once you understand that, you stop packing for fantasy scenarios and start packing for systems failure. You stop asking, would this be nice to have? And start asking, what future problem does this prevent from multiplying? That is the real doctrine. Carry capabilities, not clutter. Protect function, not ego. Stay light enough to move, quiet enough to ignore, and competent enough to rebuild what breaks. Because in a stable world, excess looks like security. In a collapsing one, excess becomes drag, and drag gets people found, trapped, exhausted, and left behind. So strip your kit until every ounce earns its place, then go use it, in the rain, in the cold, with tired hands, at night. Find out what fails while the world is still forgiving. Because when the forgiving world is gone, your gear will not rise to your fantasy. It will fall to the level of your doctrine. If this made you rethink what preparedness actually means, subscribe. Because the people who make it through hard times are rarely the ones with the most gear. They are the ones who understand what gear is for.